At the desired waypoint, push VNAV in the upper left corner of the PFD. Then use the control knob to set the assigned altitude. Push Enter. This may be repeated for any subsequent waypoints. Descent planning along the route can be facilitated as well. Simply enter assigned altitudes next to each waypoint by using the Active button and then the VNAV tile in the upper left corner of the PFD. After takeoff, turn on your autopilot and put it in heading mode. The EFIS will now provide all lateral guidance for the duration of this flight. During climb-out, note that the flight path marker provides an indication of climb performance. If the flight path marker is below the Skyway boxes, your climb performance is not adequate. The altitude capture predictor, or green arc across the active route on the MFD map, is dynamic in climbs and descents. It shows where the aircraft will reach assigned altitude and varies with current performance. If included in the database, the crossing altitudes are entered automatically for you during procedures, making it easy to enter them into your autopilot's altitude preselector. En route, you can set a target altitude to override the VNAV altitudes for an immediate climb or descent. It is similar to using the heading bug to override a current course line. If you have an altitude preselector in your aircraft, setting the target altitude on the EFIS is an extra step and is not necessary. If you receive a heading instruction from ATC, set the heading bug on the EFIS by pushing the heading button on either the PFD or MFD and set the heading using the knob. The EFIS will command the autopilot to fly that heading. Push the knob when you are finished. When ATC instructs you to resume your own navigation, simply push the heading button and turn the heading bug off with the soft key on the lower right. The EFIS will re-intercept the active leg of your flight plan. When you set a target altitude for descent, the Skyway will descend immediately at the selected VNAV descent angle. This is similar to using an altitude preselector. It is an override of the normal EFIS calculated route in the vertical plane rather than the lateral. It is like setting a heading bug override as noted earlier. For example, we are now level flight at level 210 and the Sacramento VOR is the active waypoint. Set the target altitude by pushing Menu, then choose Bugs, then choose Target Altitude and enter the altitude. Push to enter. If we set a target altitude of 12,000, the Skyway will descend immediately. If your VNAV descent angle, set under the Bugs menu, is -3 degrees, the Skyway will depict this angle. The altitude capture predictor will show a green arc across course line as noted before. This predictor is dynamic and will reflect changes in rate of descent. The vast majority of the time, ATC will assign a specific crossing altitude. In this case, simply set a target altitude as before and observe the altitude capture predictor. If assigned to cross at a specific distance prior to a fix, note the range rings on the map and place the green arc where desired by varying rate of descent with pitch and power. This symbol is especially useful to comply with clearances like
cross 10 north of Drake at 14,000,
especially when Drake is not part of your flight plan. When it's your lucky day and ATC clears you from present position direct to some further waypoint or your destination, push Active. Scroll to the desired waypoint and push the Direct soft key. Note that this is different than pushing the Direct button on the EFIS. Your route will be redrawn direct to the waypoint. The bypassed portion of your route will still be displayed, but there will be a discontinuity between it and your new active leg. A discontinuity is indicated in your flight plan anytime the system is not able to logically connect the waypoints. Be advised that there are many approaches with discontinuities in them, usually resulting from some difficulty in converting printed charts to an electronic database. Discontinuities are identified in the active waypoint list and are shown on the map as two waypoints with no course line connecting them. When faced with a discontinuity, simply navigate manually across it to the next waypoint. This may be done on autopilot by using the EFIS heading bug. In many cases, discontinuities are so small that the waypoints will sequence automatically. In other cases, they can be very large. For example, if you enter direct to your destination from 50 miles away and then choose a vectors to final approach, the discontinuity will be at least 50 miles, because a vectors to final approach is always preceded by a discontinuity, as previously described. En route CDI scale is 2 miles. When in terminal mode, indicated by a terminal advisory flag, CDI scaling becomes 1 mile. Bearing and distance to the active waypoint are always shown in the lower right corner of the PFD. Bearing, distance, and ETE for the active waypoint and the destination are shown in the lower right corner of the MFD. Alternately, ETA may be selected by using the Declutter Functions menu. Distances and times indicated are based on the course line, not as the crow flies. As you are handed off to Sacramento Approach, you request the GPS 20 at Nut Tree IPEAN transition. To activate the approach, push Active. Then choose KVCB for Nut Tree. Then choose IFR Approach. Then choose GPS 20. The asterisk means that the approach is approved for standalone GPS WAAS. Then choose the IPEAN transition and runway 20. Choosing a runway doesn't affect the way the approach is depicted. It just determines which runway is highlighted. This is especially useful on circling approaches at airports with many runways. It also identifies the runway as a waypoint in the active list to eliminate any chance of confusion. If you have a King KX 155A or 165A or a Garmin ATSL 30 NavCom, you can automatically send nav and com frequencies to the standby position. Push Active, scroll to the airport, and choose Info. Use the knob to scroll to the desired frequency and choose 2COM1 or 2COM2. This can also be done using the Nearest Airport function. To tune a VOR, push Nearest, VOR, select the desired VOR, and choose Info. Choose 2NAV1 or 2NAV2. This saves the step of manually entering frequencies once you have looked them up and eliminates the chance of an entry error. If you are cleared direct to the initial approach fix, push Active. Scroll to select the IAF and then choose Direct. Once you have activated the procedure, use the Active button to step through it and verify the approach and the mist as you did for the DP. Set the minimum altitude by pushing Menu, then pushing Bugs, then pushing Min Alt. Set the altitude and push to enter. The minimum altitude will be shown next to the target altitude with a single line beneath it. It will be indicated on the altitude tape with a yellow bar. As you fly the approach, waypoints and altitudes will sequence automatically up to the final approach fix or a holding pattern course reversal. Leave your autopilot in heading mode and set your altitude preselector to the values presented by the EFIS. If you are in a holding pattern course reversal, you will have to choose Continue to re-enable waypoint sequencing beyond the holding fix. Within 2 miles of the final approach fix, the CDI gradually scales down to 0.3 miles. As you come within 30 degrees of the final approach course, the terminal advisory flag changes to IFR approach. Complete your final landing checklist items as you approach the final approach fix hoop. Upon passing the final approach fix, automatic waypoint sequencing will be suspended, indicated by a Suspend advisory flag and a chime. The CDI will become angular like a localizer, indicated by ANG. At this time, it is good practice to arm the missed approach procedure by choosing Missed in the upper left corner of the PFD. This will re-enable automatic waypoint sequencing, and the missed approach procedure will be depicted automatically as you pass the missed approach point. If you complete the approach and land, simply ignore the Skyway depiction of the mist and roll out. Aim the flight path marker for the smallest box. Choose Zoom On to enlarge the runway depiction. Landing gear down and locked are indicated by gray wheels beneath the flight path marker. At this point, position the flight path marker on the near end of the runway. If there is a displaced threshold, the runway depiction will show dark gray for the unusable portion. As a function of TAWS, you will hear a voice call out of
500, 500.
As you pass 500 feet AGL. This is a good reminder to double-check gear, spoilers, and seatbelts, and prepare to touch down or miss the approach. As you descend through the selected minimum altitude, you will hear
Altitude, altitude,
and the AGL indicator will count down the vertical distance to go. Note the position of the runway on the PFD and look for it in the same position outside. If a missed approach is necessary, leave the autopilot in heading mode and initiate a climb. Set the altitude preselector using the altitudes from the EFIS. The system will fly the entire missed approach procedure automatically, including the holding pattern and correct entry. Congratulations! You've safely completed your first approach with the system. All other approaches are just minor variations on a theme. Now, we will fly a star with a vectors to final for the ILS. In this scenario, you are flying into Boeing Field in Seattle from the east, and you receive the CHINS 5 arrival and are told to expect vectors for the ILS to 13 right. To activate the star, push Active, Boeing Field, Star, CHINS 5, Pendleton Transition, and runway 13 right. The star waypoints will be added to your route, and any duplicate waypoints deleted automatically. Crossing altitudes will be entered for each waypoint automatically. If you are given a different crossing restriction than the one in the database, you can override it by setting a target altitude bug as previously described, or you may enter target altitudes for any or all of the waypoints in the active list using the VNAV function. Remember, the target altitude bug overrides the target altitude from the VNAV function. The majority of the time, flying will be done using the target altitude bug, or just your autopilot's altitude preselector. However, when using the VNAV system on procedures, be sure to turn off the target altitude bug to ensure proper altitude sequencing. Activate the approach by pushing Active, then choosing Boeing Field, IFR approach, ILS to 13 right, VTF for vectors to final, and runway 13 right. An extended final approach course will be depicted from an initial point to the runway. The final approach fix, NOLA, will be shown along the course line. A discontinuity will be placed between Auburn, the last fix on the star, and the IP for the final approach course, because you have told the system you will be receiving vectors from the controller, so it cannot draw a meaningful course line. As before, verify the entire procedure, including the missed, using the Active button to bring up the active waypoint list. Somewhere after Hump, you will begin getting vectors. Use the heading bug by pushing Heading, then turning the control knob. In this instance, when you expect to receive a series of headings in succession, it is okay to not push the control knob after each entry. You can leave the heading bug hot, so to speak. When you do this, be sure to push the control knob when you are finished entering headings. Be advised, though, that when the heading bug is hot, the other menu functions will be locked out. This will be enunciated on both the PFD and any MFDs in the system as menu lock. At this point, your autopilot should still be in heading mode. Set up for the ILS by tuning the localizer frequency on your nav receiver. Set the HSI source by pushing OBS and choosing HSI NAV1 or NAV2 as appropriate, and set the OBS final approach course by turning the knob. Don't forget to push Enter. This determines which source the autopilot uses when placed in nav mode or approach mode. You may also set the inbound final approach course automatically from the database by pushing Nearest, choosing ILS and the appropriate ILS, and choosing Course Sync. The HSI needle on the PFD will now be set for the final approach course and can be confirmed by comparing with the approach plate data. Glide slope indication will not be shown until valid data is received. Set a minimum altitude bug for the decision height. When a valid localizer signal is received, the conventional localizer glide slope will be displayed centered on the flight path marker. You will probably be vectored to intercept the localizer somewhere outside NOLA. You may leave your autopilot in heading mode until established on the localizer if desired. Full-scale deflection of the localizer needle will be depicted in yellow. As the localizer is intercepted, the needle will turn magenta. Then, prior to the final approach fix and below glide slope, place the autopilot in approach mode or NAV mode if your autopilot doesn't have an approach mode selection. Arm the glide slope if required in your aircraft. The autopilot will now be using the ILS signal indicated by the HSI source advisory flag. Back course localizer approaches can be accomplished by reversing the OBS setting and choosing back course on the autopilot. Arm the mist after passing the final approach fix and double-check gear, spoilers, and seat belts at the 500-foot callout. If hand flying, aim for the smallest box as before until the runway is visible on the screen. Then aim for the near end of it. On a precision approach, the raw ILS data provided by the localizer glide slope symbols are your primary reference, but you will find that flying the Skyway is much easier and leads to ATP precision levels when using the Skyway for supplemental information. Occasionally, due to minor inconsistencies in the Jeppesen nav data, the ILS may not match the center of the Skyway. In this case, the ILS always takes precedence. The vast majority of the time, they will align perfectly, and you have two completely independent systems superimposed on the PFD to cross-check against one another. If connected to a marker beacon receiver, the PFD will show passage over each marker. To execute a missed approach on an ILS, put the autopilot back in heading mode and initiate a climb. Control altitude as you have always done, using the altitudes provided on the EFIS. Notice that some legs are a climb for a distance to a specific waypoint, while others are a climb to an altitude, which is based on your actual climb performance. A phantom waypoint may be shown, which represents a point in space to begin a turn after reaching the published altitude. If Zoom On mode has been selected for the final approach, turn Zoom Off for the missed procedure. If proceeding to the hold after missed approach, the EFIS will calculate the correct entry. While in the hold, a Continue button will appear on the upper left corner of the PFD if the flight plan contains an alternate airport. Pushing Continue will remove the Suspend flag, and the course line will be drawn leaving the holding fix direct to the next waypoint, which might be your alternate airport. Waypoint sequencing will resume. Be sure to turn off the minimum altitude bug after leaving the hold, as it is likely to be invalid at the alternate airport where a new approach will be attempted. This last section will provide some miscellaneous useful information you need to know to understand and get the most out of the system. When your autopilot is in nav mode, the maximum intercept angle provided by the EFIS is 135 degrees. If you are given an intercept greater than 135 degrees, leave the autopilot in heading mode and use the EFIS heading bug to reduce the intercept angle before switching the autopilot to nav mode. When your autopilot is in heading mode and using the GPS roll steering, there is no limit to intercept angles. Regardless of the heading, the EFIS will set up a 60-degree intercept to the course line from the present position. This is important to know because it may not always do what you, as a pilot, expect it to do. For example, if you are near the airport and not on the desired course line, the EFIS intercept angle may intercept the course beyond the airport. Because of this, do not expect the EFIS to provide autopilot guidance across discontinuities or to distant course lines, because the intercept that it sets up automatically will most likely not be what you have in mind. Here, the EFIS is turning away from the airport to intercept the course line. In this example, it is turning to intercept the course line beyond the airport. In these instances, there is no need to change autopilot modes. Just use the heading bug until you are nearer to the course line and then let the EFIS perform the intercept. In this example, you can see that when the heading bug is turned off, the EFIS will intercept the localizer from 180 degrees. The EFIS has a tremendous amount of logic built into it to handle common in-flight scenarios. Sometimes, however, particularly during training in which artificial situations are created, the waypoint sequencing may not proceed as you expect, and based on the waypoint sequencing logic, you may not be able to activate the waypoint you wish. Don't panic. If the EFIS won't allow you to select the procedure turn waypoint based on your current position, for example, and automatically advances to the final approach fix, Simply use the heading bug until you get closer to the desired waypoint before setting it as the active one and turning off the heading bug. Remember, you can activate any waypoint by pushing Active, highlighting the desired waypoint, and pushing Enter. Mode 3 of TAWS is altitude loss after takeoff or on the first leg of a missed approach. This is a very valuable alerting function, but it can occasionally generate a false alert, especially during practice approaches. During approaches, this mode is armed when you arm the missed. To minimize nuisance alerts, it is inhibited below 50 feet AGL. Since the missed approach begins at the missed approach point, if you are still descending beyond this point and you are above 50 feet AGL, you will hear the alert,
Too low, terrain. Too low, terrain.
To prevent this, turn TAWS off using the TAWS inhibit switch. Terrain warning colors will still be displayed on the MFD. You will also hear this alert if you sink during gear or flap retraction. Terrain display is based on GPS WAAS altitude and a database of terrain points. Each point consists of a latitude, longitude, and elevation, and on the PFD, these points are approximately 1/3 mile apart. Based on your GPS WAAS altitude and the surrounding terrain, even at airports in relatively flat terrain, it is not uncommon to see a segment of terrain appear to briefly pass over the top of the PFD, momentarily obscuring the sky. Note that this can happen only on or within a few feet from the ground. Also, if GPS WAAS is not available and the AGL indication is using BARO, indicated by a B after the AGL altitude, static source errors can cause similar behavior. During acceleration and rotation, many static systems will indicate a slight increase in pressure. While not noticeable on mechanical indicators, the EFIS may momentarily display this as beneath a terrain segment, and the terrain will obscure the sky for an instant. The display of attitude is unaffected as you still have a valid artificial horizon line. This is not a malfunction. If you find it objectionable, simply turn the PFD terrain off by pushing Menu, choose Declutter, uncheck Terrain, and choose Done. You can re-enable PFD terrain display once you are airborne. Holding patterns are easy with the EFIS. Simply set the HSI source to GPS. Set a manual OBS course through the holding fix and use the heading bug to fly the pattern, with the OBS course as one of the legs. If the holding fix is not part of your flight plan, add it using the Active menu. Set the holding fix as the active waypoint using the Active menu. Turn the knob to select it and push to enter. Push OBS and turn the knob to set the desired radial. You will see the magenta course line rotate around the holding fix. Now, just use the heading bug to fly the holding pattern. For leg lengths, you can use a timer from the Timers menu or estimate distance using the moving map range rings and waypoint information. Use the lubber line and projected path on the moving map to fly a very precise pattern corrected for winds aloft.
Well, I hope you've learned something from this video. By watching this training, reading the manual, and spending some time with the display in simulator mode, you can prepare yourself for flying with the Chelton EFIS. As you gain experience with your EFIS, please contact Chelton with your comments. Many customers can attest to the fact that their suggestions are heard and frequently implemented. Thanks for watching. I'm Dick Miller, and maybe I'll see you on a flight check one of these days.